The small town of Willow Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names. Life moved at a slow, predictable pace, and Sundays were sacred. Most people spent their mornings at St. Mary's Church, nestled in the heart of the town. The church itself was an old building with creaky wooden floors, stained glass windows that cast colorful patterns on the walls, and a faint smell of polished wood and candle wax. It had stood there for over a century, witnessing baptisms, weddings, funerals, and countless sermons. On this particular Sunday, Pastor Daniel stood behind the pulpit, his voice echoing through the quiet sanctuary as he spoke about faith, hope, and redemption. The congregation listened intently, or at least most of them did. Near the front pew, 9-year-old Emily Harper sat between her parents, swinging her legs back and forth because they didn't quite reach the floor yet. At first glance, she seemed like any other child trying to sit still during a long sermon. But then something strange happened. Emily suddenly stopped fidgeting. She tilted her head, staring down at the floor beneath her feet, her brow furrowed. And without warning, she pointed straight at the ground. Her mother, Mrs. Harper, leaned over and gently pulled her arm down. "Emily," she whispered, "what are you doing? Sit still." But Emily didn't listen. Instead, she leaned forward, pressing both hands against the floor and looking up at her mom with wide eyes. "There's something here," she said, loud enough for a few nearby parishioners to turn their heads. Mrs. Harper shushed her again, glancing apologetically at those around them. She assumed Emily was just bored or imagining things, as children often do. However, Emily wasn't done. She started whispering urgently, almost frantically. "Mom, I'm serious. There's something bad under here." Her tone sent a chill down Mrs. Harper's spine, though she tried to brush it off. "Hush now, sweetheart," she murmured. "We'll talk about it later." Despite her mother's efforts, Emily kept pointing at the same spot, growing more insistent by the second. Some members of the congregation began exchanging curious glances. A man sitting 2 rows back raised an eyebrow, while an elderly woman leaned closer to her husband and muttered, "What's wrong with that little girl?" Even Pastor Daniels noticed the commotion. He paused mid-sentence, scanning the room until his gaze landed on Emily. For a moment, the entire church fell silent. All eyes were on the young girl who seemed so certain that something was hidden beneath the floor. Though no one could have guessed it then, Emily's actions would soon unravel a mystery that had been buried, literally, for decades. As the whispers spread through the congregation, the once serene atmosphere of St. Mary's Church began to shift. People who had been focused on Pastor Daniel's sermon were now sneaking glances at Emily and her increasingly agitated behavior. The girl's urgent pointing and hushed exclamations about something bad under the floorboards had caught the attention of more than just her parents. Mrs. Carter, an elderly woman known for her sharp observations, leaned forward from the pew behind the Harpers. She tapped Mrs. Harper lightly on the shoulder. "Is everything all right?" Mrs. Carter asked in a low voice, her eyes flickering between Emily and the spot on the floor where the child was fixated. Mrs. Harper sighed, clearly embarrassed. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "She keeps saying there's something under there, but I think it's just her imagination." Mrs. Carter frowned, unconvinced. "What exactly is she saying?" Before Mrs. Harper could answer, Emily spoke up again, louder this time. "It's important. You have to look." Her small voice carried further than expected, causing several heads to turn. A few people chuckled nervously, dismissing it as childish curiosity, but others exchanged uneasy glances. There was something about the seriousness in Emily's tone that made it hard to ignore. After the service ended, the chatter only grew louder. As families filed out of the pews, many stopped near the front to get a closer look at the area Emily had pointed out. Some knelt down, inspecting the wooden floorboards with curious expressions. One man even gave the floor a light tap with his shoe, though he quickly stood up when nothing seemed unusual. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. What if the little girl wasn't imagining things? What if there really was something hidden beneath their feet? Pastor Daniels, overhearing fragments of the conversations, felt compelled to step in. He approached the group gathering near the altar, his calm demeanor masking his own growing unease. "What seems to be the concern?" he asked gently, addressing no one in particular. Mrs. Carter spoke up first. "It's the child, Pastor. She was very insistent during her sermon, kept pointing at this spot and talking about something bad. We're wondering if we should check it out." The pastor hesitated, glancing at the worn floorboards. They had been there for as long as anyone could remember, untouched and unremarkable. Yet the thought of ignoring a potential issue nagged at him. "Perhaps it wouldn't hurt to take a closer look," he said finally. "Better safe than sorry." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. While some dismissed the idea as overreaction, others nodded solemnly, recalling old rumors about the church's history. Willow Creek might have been a quiet town, but like any community, it had its share of secrets. And sometimes those secrets lingered in the most unexpected places. By the time the last parishioners left the church, the story of Emily's mysterious behavior had already begun to spread. By Monday morning, nearly everyone in town would know about the little girl who claimed there was something hidden under the floor of St. Mary's Church, and speculation would run wild. But for now, all anyone could do was wait and wonder. Was Emily's insistence merely childish fancy, or was she onto something far more significant? The next morning, Pastor Daniels arrived at St. Mary's Church with a sense of unease weighing on his shoulders. He had spent the previous evening replaying Emily's words in his mind, trying to decide whether he was overreacting. After all, how could a child possibly know something about the church that even he, as its pastor, didn't? Still, the image of her wide, serious eyes stayed with him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that ignoring her might be a mistake. He wasn't alone for long. Two deacons from the congregation, Mr. Thompson and Mr. Gray, joined him shortly after. Both men were trusted members of the community, known for their practicality and level-headedness. They carried flashlights, hammers, and a crowbar, just in case they needed to pry anything open. As they stood near the altar, Pastor Daniels explained what had happened during Sunday's service. "She seemed so certain," he said, gesturing toward the spot where Emily had pointed. "I don't want to jump to conclusions, but it wouldn't hurt to take a closer look." Mr. Thompson nodded thoughtfully, crouching down to examine the floorboards. "It's an old building," he remarked. "Could just be loose boards or maybe some kind of storage space underneath." But when he tapped the wood with his knuckles, the sound that echoed back was unmistakably hollow. Everyone froze, exchanging startled glances. "That doesn't sound right," Mr. Gray muttered, running his hand over the same area. The floorboards felt solid enough, but the hollow noise suggested there was empty space beneath them. Curiosity quickly turned into concern. None of the three men could recall any mention of a basement or hidden compartment under the church. It wasn't supposed to exist. Pastor Daniels straightened up, his expression grim. "Let's see if we can get these boards up," he said firmly. Using the tools they'd brought, the men carefully pried up one of the planks. Dust filled the air as they worked, making them cough and wave their hands to clear it away. Beneath the board, they found another layer of wood. But this time, it was different. Instead of ordinary floorboards, they uncovered a trapdoor, its surface rough and splintered with age. A heavy silence fell over the group. No one spoke as they stared at the discovery. The trapdoor looked ancient, almost forgotten, with rusted hinges and a small keyhole that hadn't been used in decades. It was obvious no one had touched it in years, or perhaps ever. "Well, this is unexpected," Mr. Thompson said finally, breaking the tension. His voice wavered slightly, betraying his discomfort. Pastor Daniels reached out and traced the edge of the trapdoor with his fingers. "Where do you think this leads?" he asked quietly, though no one had an answer. Mr. Gray glanced around nervously. "Do we really want to find out?" Despite their hesitation, none of them could walk away now. Whatever lay beneath the trapdoor had clearly been concealed for a reason, and the mystery gnawed at them. Pastor Daniels spotted a rusted key hanging on a nail nearby. It seemed too convenient to be a coincidence. Taking a deep breath, he picked it up and inserted it into the lock. With a click, the trapdoor opened, revealing darkness below. The three men leaned closer, shining their flashlights into the void. What they saw made their blood run cold. Lying inside the shallow compartment were old newspapers, yellowed letters, and most shockingly, a human skull staring back at them. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then reality hit like a thunderclap. They weren't dealing with a harmless secret anymore. This was something far darker and far more dangerous. The sight of the human skull sent a wave of shock through Pastor Daniels, Mr. Thompson, and Mr. Gray. For a moment, none of them could breathe, let alone speak. The dim light from their flashlights danced across the dusty compartment, illuminating fragments of old newspapers, brittle letters tied with faded string, and other objects that looked like they hadn't seen daylight in decades. But it was the skull, its hollow eye sockets staring blankly upward, that held their attention. It wasn't just an object. It was a reminder of a life lost, someone who had once been part of the world, but now lay forgotten beneath the very floor where people prayed. Pastor Daniels was the first to break the silence. "We need to call the police," he said firmly, his voice trembling despite his effort to stay calm. He stepped back from the trapdoor, wiping his hands on his pants as if trying to erase the image from his mind. Mr. Thompson nodded quickly, already reaching for his phone, while Mr. Gray remained frozen, his flashlight still trained on the grim discovery. "This can't be real," Mr. Gray whispered, shaking his head. "How could something like this happen here? In our church?" No one had an answer. Willow Creek was the kind of town where nothing bad ever seemed to happen, or at least nothing anyone talked about openly. Secrets might have existed, but they were buried so deep that most people didn't even know to look for them. And yet, here was undeniable proof that something terrible had occurred right under their feet. Literally. Within minutes, the quiet sanctuary was transformed into a hive of activity. Police officers arrived, their boots echoing loudly against the wooden floors as they cordoned off the area around the altar. Detective Laura Hayes took charge, her sharp eyes scanning the scene before turning to the three men who had made the discovery. "Tell me exactly what happened," she instructed, pulling out a notepad. Pastor Daniels recounted the events leading up to the find. The little girl's strange behavior during Sunday's service, the congregation's growing unease, and their decision to investigate further. As he spoke, Detective Hayes listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes or asking follow-up questions. Meanwhile, forensic experts carefully examined the trapdoor and its contents. They photographed everything meticulously before removing the items piece by piece. The skull was placed into a labeled bag, followed by the old newspapers and letters. One officer held up a crumpled envelope, its edges brittle with age. "There's writing on this," he said, squinting at the faded ink. "Looks like a name. Sarah Bennett." Detective Hayes' expression hardened. She recognized the name immediately. It belonged to a young woman who had gone missing nearly 30 years ago. At the time, the case had baffled investigators. No body was ever found, no suspects identified, and eventually, the trail went cold. Now it seemed answers might finally come to light. As the investigation unfolded, whispers spread among the townspeople gathered outside the church. Some stood in small clusters, murmuring nervously about the discovery. Others watched silently, their faces pale with disbelief. Emily Harper, standing near her parents, clutched her stuffed bear tightly, her wide eyes fixed on the commotion. When Detective Hayes approached her later that day, the little girl would reveal more details about her mysterious knowledge. But for now, all anyone could do was speculate. For Willow Creek, the discovery marked the beginning of a journey into the past. Long-buried secrets, hidden beneath layers of time and tradition, were about to resurface. And as the sun set over the quiet town, casting long shadows across St. Mary's Church, it became clear that life there would never be the same again. Detective Laura Hayes wasted no time diving into the investigation. The name Sarah Bennett was enough to send chills through anyone familiar with Willow Creek's history. 30 years earlier, Sarah had been a vibrant young woman, a beloved daughter, a loyal friend, and an active member of St. Mary's Church. She had vanished without a trace one summer evening, leaving behind only unanswered questions and heartbroken loved ones. Her disappearance had haunted the town for years, but as time passed, people learned to live with the uncertainty. Until now. The forensic team worked tirelessly to analyze the remains found beneath the church floor. Initial tests confirmed that the skull and other bones belonged to a female, roughly in her mid-20s at the time of death. Dental records matched those of Sarah Bennett, providing irrefutable proof that the body was hers. The discovery reignited old wounds, bringing back memories of the days when search parties scoured the woods and posters with Sarah's smiling face lined every street corner. For her family, who had waited decades for closure, the news was both devastating and relieving. As Detective Hayes dug deeper, she uncovered connections between Sarah and several prominent families in Willow Creek. Old police reports revealed that Sarah had been romantically involved with Thomas Reed, a married man who served as a trustee of St. Mary's Church during that era. Their relationship had been whispered about in hushed tones, but no one dared confront Reed directly. He was a respected figure in the community, wealthy, influential, and seemingly untouchable. When Sarah disappeared, some suspected foul play. But without evidence, the rumors remained just that, speculation. Hayes decided to focus her efforts on Thomas Reed. Now in his late 70s, Reed lived alone in a sprawling house on the outskirts of town. His wife had passed away years ago, and their children rarely visited. When officers arrived at his doorstep, Reed appeared frail and unsteady on his feet, leaning heavily on a cane. But his sharp eyes betrayed a mind still alert and calculating. Thomas Reed, Detective Hayes asked, flashing her badge. "We need to ask you some questions about Sarah Bennett." Reed's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his gaze. Fear? Guilt? It was hard to tell. "Sarah," he repeated slowly, feigning confusion. "That poor girl. Such a shame what happened to her." "We believe we found her remains," Hayes said bluntly, watching him closely for any reaction. Reed stiffened slightly but quickly masked it with a sorrowful nod. "Terrible business," he muttered, "but I'm afraid I can't help you. I haven't thought about Sarah in years." Despite his dismissive tone, Hayes wasn't convinced. She requested permission to search Reed's home, citing probable cause based on the evidence linking him to Sarah. Reed reluctantly agreed, though his hands trembled as he signed the paperwork. Inside the house, detectives discovered a trove of incriminating items. Faded photographs of Sarah hidden in a desk drawer, letters she had written to him tucked away in an old shoebox, and even a locket engraved with her initials. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of a man desperate to keep his secrets buried, just like Sarah herself. Back at the station, Hayes reviewed the case files late into the night. Something about Emily Harper's role in the discovery nagged at her. How had the little girl known to point out that exact spot in the church? Was it mere coincidence, or was there something more to her story? Determined to find answers, Hayes made plans to visit Emily the following day. Whatever truths lay hidden in the child's words, they might hold the key to unraveling the final threads of this decades-old mystery. The next morning, Detective Laura Hayes arrived at the Harper household with a mix of curiosity and caution. Emily's role in uncovering the hidden remains was unlike anything Hayes had encountered in her career. A child pointing to a specific spot in a church floor, and being right about it, wasn't something that could be easily explained away as coincidence. She needed to understand what had driven Emily to act so insistently. Mrs. Harper greeted Hayes at the door, her expression a blend of nervousness and gratitude. "Thank you for coming, Detective," she said softly. "We've been wondering how we can help." Hayes nodded politely before turning her attention to Emily, who sat cross-legged on the living room rug, clutching her stuffed bear. The little girl watched the detective with wide, cautious eyes, as if trying to decide whether she could trust her. Hayes crouched down to Emily's level, softening her tone. "Hi, Emily. Do you remember me from church?" she asked gently. Emily nodded but didn't say anything. Her grip tightened slightly on the bear. "I just want to ask you a few questions about Sunday," Hayes continued. "You were pointing at the floor during the service. Can you tell me why?" For a moment, Emily hesitated, glancing at her mother as if seeking permission. Mrs. Harper gave her an encouraging smile. "It's okay, sweetheart. You can tell her." Taking a deep breath, Emily finally spoke. "I kept having dreams," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "A lady was crying in my dreams. She told me she needed help." Hayes leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "What did the lady look like?" "She had long hair, and she looked sad," Emily replied, her brow furrowing as she tried to recall the details. "She kept saying, 'Find me. Tell them I'm here.'" And then she pointed to the church. "And you thought she meant under the floor?" Hayes asked, careful not to sound skeptical. Emily nodded vigorously. "Yes, she showed me where to look. That's why I kept pointing. I wasn't making it up. I really saw her." Her words sent a shiver down Hayes' spine, though she did her best to remain composed. Was Emily describing visions, imagination, or something else entirely? Whatever the explanation, the timing and accuracy of her actions were undeniable. Mrs. Harper chimed in, her voice tinged with both pride and bewilderment. "She's always been sensitive, Detective. Ever since she was little, she's talked about seeing things other people don't. We never knew whether to believe her or not. But this," she trailed off, shaking her head. "This is different." Hayes studied Emily for a moment longer, noting the sincerity in her expression. There was no hint of mischief or fabrication, just a child who genuinely believed she'd been helping someone in need. Whether her dreams were supernatural or subconscious, they had led them straight to Sarah Bennett's remains. It was as if Emily had tapped into a part of history that everyone else had forgotten or tried to bury. Before leaving, Hayes thanked the Harpers for their time. As she walked back to her car, her mind raced with possibilities. Emily's account added another layer of mystery to an already perplexing case. Could the little girl's intuition have been triggered by residual energy tied to the church, or was it simply a remarkable coincidence? Hayes didn't have answers yet, but one thing was clear. Emily's role in the investigation couldn't be ignored. Back at the station, Hayes shared Emily's story with her team. Some dismissed it as a child's overactive imagination, while others found it eerily compelling. Regardless of their opinions, the evidence against Thomas Reed was mounting. With each new clue, the truth grew closer, and justice for Sarah Bennett felt within reach. But even as the pieces fell into place, Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to learn. Something about Emily's involvement hinted at forces beyond logic, and it left her wondering. Had the past truly been waiting for someone like Emily to bring it to light? Detective Laura Hayes returned to the station with renewed determination. The evidence against Thomas Reed was mounting, but she knew they needed a confession, or at least something concrete, to close the case. Reed had been cooperative during the initial search of his home, but there was an air of practiced calm about him that made Hayes uneasy. He had spent decades hiding his secret, and it was clear he wasn't going to admit anything without pressure. The following day, Hayes arranged for Reed to come in for questioning. His frail appearance didn't fool her. Beneath the thin frame and shaky hands lay a man who had once wielded power and influence. As he shuffled into the interrogation room, leaning heavily on his cane, Hayes reminded herself not to underestimate him. She began by asking general questions about Sarah Bennett, how well he'd known her, what their relationship had been like, and whether he'd noticed anything unusual before her disappearance. At first, Reed stuck to his story. "She was a lovely girl," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "But I barely knew her. We attended the same church, that's all." Hayes leaned back in her chair, studying him carefully. "Mr. Reed, we found letters from Sarah in your home. Letters addressed directly to you. Care to explain?" Reed's face paled, but he quickly recovered. "Those are old memories," he said dismissively. "Nothing more than innocent correspondence." "Innocent?" Hayes raised an eyebrow. "You kept them hidden for 30 years. That doesn't sound very innocent to me." She slid a photograph across the table, a faded picture of Sarah smiling brightly, tucked inside a locket engraved with her initials. "This was also in your possession. Why would you keep something so personal if your relationship was as casual as you claim?" Reed's jaw tightened, and for the first time, cracks appeared in his composure. He stared at the photo, his eyes clouding with emotion. For several moments, he said nothing, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. Then, finally, he sighed. A heavy, defeated sound. "I loved her," he admitted quietly, his voice breaking. "More than I should have. She made me feel alive again. But when she threatened to tell my wife about us, I panicked. I didn't mean for things to go as far as they did." Hayes listened intently, letting him speak. Over the next hour, Reed confessed everything. On the night Sarah disappeared, they had argued near the church. In a moment of rage and desperation, he had struck her, unaware of his own strength. By the time he realized what he'd done, it was too late. She was gone. Terrified of being caught, he hid her body beneath the church floor, believing no one would ever find it. Decades passed, and he convinced himself that the past was buried forever, until Emily Harper pointed to the exact spot where Sarah lay. As Reed recounted the horrifying details, tears streamed down his face. "I've lived with this guilt every single day," he whispered. "Every sermon, every prayer." I could hear her voice accusing me. I thought God would forgive me, but he never did. When the interview ended, Hayes stepped out of the room, her heart heavy with the weight of the truth. Reed's confession confirmed what everyone had feared. Sarah's death had been a tragic act of violence, concealed by fear and shame. Though justice would finally be served, Hayes couldn't help but think about the ripple effects of his actions. A family had grieved for decades without answers, and the community had unknowingly worshipped above the remains of a young woman whose life had been cut short. Later that evening, news of Reed's arrest spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. Some residents were shocked. Others claimed they had always suspected something sinister about him. But amidst the murmurs of disbelief and anger, one name stood out: Emily Harper. The little girl who had pointed to the floor in church had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the darkest secrets can eventually come to light. And as the town prepared to lay Sarah Bennett to rest properly, whispers began to circulate about Emily's mysterious dreams and whether she possessed a gift beyond explanation. The discovery of Sarah Bennett's remains and Thomas Reed's confession brought a mix of emotions to Willow Creek. For Sarah's family, the news was bittersweet. After decades of unanswered questions and sleepless nights, they could finally give her a proper burial. The church organized a memorial service in her honor, inviting the entire town to attend. On a crisp autumn morning, people gathered inside St. Mary's Church, filling the pews until there was barely room to stand. Flowers adorned the altar, their sweet fragrance mingling with the faint scent of polished wood that had always defined the sanctuary. Pastor Daniels led the service, his voice steady but filled with emotion as he spoke about Sarah's life and untimely death. He reminded everyone that even in moments of darkness, healing could begin when truth came to light. "Sarah deserved better," he said softly, pausing to collect himself. "And though we cannot change the past, we can honor her memory by ensuring that love and justice guide us moving forward." As the congregation bowed their heads in prayer, Emily sat quietly between her parents, clutching her stuffed bear tightly. She didn't fully understand all the details of what had happened, but she knew she had helped bring peace to someone who needed it. When the service ended, several parishioners approached her, thanking her for her role in uncovering the truth. Some whispered among themselves about how remarkable it was that a child had known exactly where to look, a feat no adult could explain. In the weeks that followed, life in Willow Creek slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. Yet the events left an indelible mark on the town. Conversations around dinner tables and coffee shops often turned to Emily's mysterious dreams and whether she possessed some kind of special gift. Mrs. Carter, the elderly woman who had first noticed Emily's behavior, became convinced that the girl had been guided by something beyond this world. It's like she heard Sarah calling out from the other side. She told anyone who would listen. Others were more skeptical, chalking it up to coincidence or intuition, but none could deny that Emily had played a pivotal role in solving the mystery. For Emily herself, things remained largely unchanged. She continued attending school, playing with her friends, and dreaming vividly at night. Occasionally, she mentioned seeing someone in her dreams again, but these visions seemed less urgent now, as if whatever force had guided her before had completed its task. Her parents kept a close eye on her, unsure whether to encourage her sensitivity or shield her from attention. They decided to let her be, trusting that she would navigate this unique aspect of herself in her own time. Meanwhile, St. Mary's Church underwent renovations to repair the damaged floor and ensure such secrets could never remain hidden again. The trapdoor was sealed permanently, its existence marked only by a small plaque near the altar dedicated to Sarah Bennett. It read, "In loving memory of Sarah, whose voice was silenced but not forgotten." May her story remind us of the importance of truth and compassion. Though the case was closed, its impact lingered. Detective Laura Hayes found herself reflecting on the investigation often, particularly on Emily's inexplicable connection to the past. It challenged everything she thought she knew about logic and evidence, leaving her with a sense of awe, and perhaps a little unease, at the mysteries of the human spirit. Willow Creek moved on, as towns do, but the story of Sarah Bennett and the little girl who pointed to the floor became part of its legacy. It served as a reminder that even the smallest voices can make the biggest difference, and that sometimes justice finds its way through the unlikeliest of messengers.